بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد.
Imam Al-Baqir's era was very important from the historical point of view. And this is what I have to give you a little bit of history of the past before we come to the fifth Imam. Because when we look at this phenomenon of hadith, the sayings of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, we see that the Khulafa from day one, from the days of Abu Bakr, the campaign started to actually suppress the ahadith of Rasulullah in the name of protecting the Quran. Verbal transmission of the ahadith was discouraged and strongly, opposed. And this was even intensified during the time of the second Khalifa. That he actually brought some of the prominent companions who had been assigned different positions in different cities. He called them back and he said, I've heard that you have been spreading the ahadith of Rasulullah among the people. And I don't want you to do this. Therefore, I confine you to the city of Medina. You're not allowed to go out of here. And so verbal transmission of hadith was prohibited. A written form of hadith was not even tolerated. Whatever was gathered, even by the first Khalifa, he first of all asked people to bring those writings and then he burned them, destroyed them. And this is where this was continued by the Khulafa who came later on. Even when we talk about the era of the Banu Umayyah, all the way till the time of the Khalifa known as Umar ibn Abdul Aziz. And Umar ibn Abdul Aziz is one of the Khulafa of the time of Imam Muhammad Al-Baqir alayhi salatu wasalam. And this is where we see that he is the one who actually lifted this prohibition of gathering and writing hadith. And this is a vast subject by itself. What were the motivation? What were the factors which changed this person, Umar ibn Abdul Aziz, to actually go against the policy of the previous Khulafa, all the way from Abu Bakr to his own time? Of course, Amir al-Mu'minin is exception to this whole group. And this is where, there are many, many reasons given. One of them is that, he was relatively most just among the Banu Umayyah, a good person in that way. And so they say because of his goodness, he was a khair. And therefore, this is one of the things he did, just as he also prohibited the tradition of cursing Amir al-Mu'minin in Friday khutbahs, which had been going on for about 50 to 70 years. However, there are other scholars who actually have studied this issue more deeply, including our grand Marja, Ayatollah Sistani. May Allah prolong his life. He has a discussion on the issue of the history of compilation of hadith. And in that risala, he actually brings up this point. What were the motivations? And he talks about other motivations, but he says that there is one point that people don't talk about more. He says the Khulafa suppressed the ahadith. Although they officially suppressed the ahadith, but they were not able to fulfill, fully control this process. What happened was that this tradition of circulation of hadith went underground, away from the public arena and the eyes of the government. Umar ibn Abdul Aziz, according to Ayatollah Sistani, he says he was a clever Khalifa. He allowed the writing of ahadith, lifted that prohibition, so that the whole process of circulation of ahadith will now come out of the shadows, and perhaps he will be able to control its direction. That was the motivation, or at least part of the motivation that Umar ibn Abdul Aziz lifted this prohibition of narrating and writing ahadith of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. From the Shia point of view, the statements of the Prophet and the Imams collectively is known as hadith. And the scholar companions of our Imams became the custodian of the Imams' teachings. Sometimes, of course, there were many companions who would just hear. But there were many who actually would come down with their pen and writing material. Sometimes they wrote down in their notebooks, and sometimes they just, and they would also then narrate to other Shias. And among those who wrote down these ahadith, some would then even go and kind of make a good copy of it. And some of them would just recopy whatever they had heard, but others went a step ahead. And what they did was they actually looked at the subject and the themes of the hadith, and they would put the hadith of one subject in one notebook. And so this tradition of the thematic, even compilation of the notebooks, which had the sayings of Imam Muhammad Al-Baqir alayhi salam, and after him Imam Ja'far as-Sadiq alayhi salam, because most of the ahadith that we have in the Shia tradition come from the 5th and the 6th Imam. And this is where we see that in history, by the time of Ghaybat al-Sughra, when the imamat of our present Imam, Ajjalallahu Ta'ala Faraj al-Sharif, started, salawat from the era which is known as the era of Ghaybat al-Sughra. By that time, they were around Usul Arba'miya. It is known as 400 notebooks. Sheikh Kulayni, the compiler of the first collection of Shia hadith, actually used these 400 notebooks as his source. Means these were the notebooks which were coming from the days of the 5th Imam, 6th Imam, and then going on to companions and their disciples. And Sheikh Kulayni, in a way, was able to put all this together. It took him almost, from what I can recall, 20 years to do that. And when he put it together, this is where then he compiled Al-Kafi. He basically gathered the hadiths, categorized them according to the subject, and placed them in the appropriate, sections. And this is where you have the first collection of the Shia hadith. This tradition of preserving the ahadith of the Imams continued. Other collections were prepared gradually after Sheikh Kulayni. Sheikh Saduq comes in, and then Sheikh Tusi comes in. And so when you look at the historical time of the early days of Ghaybat, you have one book, Al-Kafi, multi-volume book, of course, by Sheikh Kulayni. Then you have another book by Sheikh Saduq, multi-volume, known as Man La Yahdurhu al-Faqih. And then another collection of hadith by Sheikh Tusi, actually two collections. One known as Al-Istibsar, and the other one was known as Tahzib. And so these 4 books, one of Kulayni, one of Saduq, and 2 of them from Sheikh Tusi, they basically are known as Al-Kutub al-Arba'a, the 4 canonical books of the Shia hadith. These are the early day compilation of the hadith of the Shia tradition. Salawat. So what we see here, that the process which was started by Imam Muhammad Al-Baqir to share the ahadith of Rasulullah and to teach to the companions so that they may also retain in their memory, as well as put that in writing so it can be preserved for the generations to come. Our scholars became the beneficiary of these this hard work and the processes initiated initiated by Imam Muhammad Al-Baqir. And the ulama, the scholars, then developed various sciences to verify and scrutinize the authenticity of the hadith. And also, ilm al-hadith came in, how to understand the ahadith and how to bring the ahadith together. And this became a very important element for development of what is known as Islamic jurisprudence, fiqh, Islamic laws. And this tradition continued. You have Kulayni, Sheikh Saduq, Mufid, Sayyid Murtaza, Sheikh Tusi. Sheikh Tusi is the founder of the Hawza Ilmiya of Najaf 1,000 years ago, when he moved from Baghdad to Najaf. And this went on, and after that we see, for example, you come to the era of Allama Hilli, Shahili Awwal, the center of learning would move from Najaf to Hilla, to Samarra, then it goes on to Isfahan. You have Allama Majlisi there. And this is where we come to realize that, our ulama continued this tradition and just cherished the knowledge that they gained from the hadith of Sadiqain, Imam Muhammad Al-Baqir alayhi salam and Imam Ja'far al-Sadiq alayhi salatu wasalam. Salawat. One of the important points I would like to share with you is that many of our senior mujtahideen from the days of Kulayni till the present time, they have this tradition of the ijaza of riwayat or the ijaza of hadith, where a teacher would give a written certificate to the student that you are allowed to quote these ahadith through me. And so the teacher has an ijaza from his teacher, the generation before, and you can actually trace these ijazas, these certificates of the mujtahideen, from one generation to another continuously, without any missing link, going all the way to Sheikh Kulayni and through his, or Sheikh Saduq, and through their chain of narrators from the ashab to the imams of Ahlul Bayt alayhim salatu wasalam themselves. These ijazas these days, they have just honorary value to it. It doesn't have an academic value as such, but this is a very important point to keep in mind, that there is a continuity and there is a link among the this family of scholarship, going all the way from Imam Muhammad Al-Baqir alayhi salam to the present Maraje. Salawat.